Hello everyone and welcome back to the Cyclocross Social podcast. A lot has happened in the world of cyclocross. The debate around the reformed World Cup has completely exploded. The UCI president David Lappartient has come in saying he is threatening to ban people from the World Championships if they don't race enough World Cups. A lot is going on. We are today going to try and analyze this situation, debrief what's going on, and just give a general sense of who the players involved are and what their stakes are. And as always, our analyst Issam is here to do that.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Let's try and sketch the situation we are in. The Cyclocross World Cup has been reformed by Flanders Classics, that is. The UCI, they outsourced the World Cup Cyclocross to Flanders Classics. The first time they took over was the 2020-2021 season. That was heavily impacted by COVID. So the 2021-2022 season was the first season World Cup new form. There were 16 races, now there are 14 races. This used to be between 6 and 9 in the past. The debate this season sparked when Lars van der Haar won the World Cup in Maasmechelen, but announced he would not be doing a full World Cup calendar. This is not new. The World Cup leader in the past has heavily criticized the World Cup. He said this year, I'm not racing Dublin because I prefer the X2O trophy, and I'm not doing Val di Sole because I'm going on training camp. This was, as said, no news, so nothing really happened until Sven Nys, after the European Championships, announced I am racing the Super Prestige in Niel rather than the World Cup in Dendermonde. He has been quoted saying, I would rather win 3 extra crosses this season than a classification. So basically, he doesn't care about winning a classification, it's just about winning as many races as possible. The de facto cyclocross coordinator at the UCI headquarters, Peter van den Abelen, very influential person there, was then interviewed by Sporza, a Belgian news website, saying that this was not a good development. He says that the World Cup needs to critically revalue their format, try and see how it's working, how it's not working, because he says the top guys who are there always need to do a World Cup. The World Cup is the most important classification. He also said he couldn't therefore understand the decision that Nys made. This was a relatively diplomatic interview, but everything changed when Lappartient put fire in the hole this weekend in an interview with Direct Velo. He came out as the bulldog, quoting, "The World Cup is not a toy. You cannot choose which race you do and which race you don't. It needs to be respected. If riders are tired, like Thibaut says, then I can't understand why he races Niel and not Dendermonde. If riders prefer a national race over a World Cup, they should be excluded from the rest of the World Cup and also the World Championships." End of the quote. That obviously caused a lot of uproar amongst riders who were feared of being banned from World Cups and everything, and that gives us the situation we have now. The UCI has put the fire in the hole, the riders are unhappy, which has been lingering for a while. Issam, what's your most important takeaway from all of this?
David Lappartient had his opinion after Van den Abelen and his comments that were made, and I think that Lappartient tried to, in a attempt to defend the World Cup and have the World Cup as the most important racing competition in cyclocross, and that was in my opinion, a little desperate attempt in some extent, especially his quote. I think that the quote that he made was definitely not helping the cause whatsoever. I think it even made the situation worse than it already was. Van den Abelen reacted also maybe a little bit out of proportion, but you can understand that in a way because they felt that they were put aside and that they had to look at one of the guys that is important for the World Cup, picking the Super Prestige over the World Cup. And then afterwards, obviously with the comments that were made with Lappartient, there was a lot of commotion. Are the big three are not going to be participating in the World Championships because there was this whole saying that if the riders pick a national race or another race that is in the same weekend as the World Cup and pick that over the World Cup and not participate in the World Cup race, they should not be able to race in the World Cup, but also not race in the World Championships. And there was talks about the big three, the guys and the women as well that are doing the multi-disciplines in a way, and that sometimes have to make those choices. Some riders that for sponsor reasons, have to race in France or in Switzerland or in the Czech Republic as well. They all have races that sometimes cross with the World Cup. But I think that for Lappartient, it was not. I don't think that he really wanted to execute that quote, or that he is really considering such measurements. But I think that he was just, it was an attempt to, show as UCI, as the government body of cycling, that they are fully behind the World Cup, and that they are, that if necessary, they would try to do anything and everything within their powers to defend the World Cup and make sure that everybody picks the World Cup over the Super Prestige or the X2O trophy. And I think in the end, we should not expect that this is going to end up where, the big three, Van der Poel, Pidcock, Van Aert, and now all of a sudden, if they pick a Super Prestige over World Cup, are not going to be able to participate in the World Championships. And so it is going to be for other riders. I mean, even for the riders that are in the United States, that have visa problems and all these kind of stuff. So, it was a stupid quote, if I'm going to be honest. It was definitely not smart from Lappartient. And it was almost like he was detached from the sport. And, I didn't really understand why he came up with something like that.
Well, I do think he is actually detached from the sport of cyclocross. This is a guy who has so many functions in other stuff that the question is he even competent to lead the UCI? But I haven't really seen him comment on cyclocross in ages. So I do think he is detached from the sport, and this quote is delusional. But first of all, the misconception is that Van Aert, Van der Poel and Pidcock wouldn't be allowed to race World Championships if they don't race all the World Cups. This is a misconception. Lappartient in that interview says, if you're tired, like Nys is, you can skip a weekend, no problem. If you don't want to go to the US because it's expensive, no problem, we should try and fix that. He's specifically pointing towards the fact that Nys chose Niel over Dendermonde. So this would have an impact on Van der Haar choosing Kortrijk over Dublin, not Val di Sole. If he skips Val di Sole for training, that would be allowed because he doesn't race that weekend. However, there's just no way this stands up in European court. The European law is super specific. There's a freedom of your ability to work. You can work wherever you want. There have been attempts like this with the European Super League in football, or for American listeners, soccer, the European version of football, the real football. And secondly, there's been some speed skating attempt where the ISU, which is the speed skating version of the UCI, tried to ban its athletes from doing a race in Dubai for a lot of money. That didn't hold up in front of the European Committee either. So long story short, this quote, it puts things super sharp, things are polarized, but it's never going to hold up. That doesn't mean that there isn't a problem. This week there was an article on the Dutch public news organization, the NOS. They had an interview with Van der Haar, Sven Nys and Gerben de Knecht. They all criticized the World Cup. Van der Haar also appeared on the radio that evening, and I'm just going to show you or let you hear an audio snap of that.
Het is ook gewoon vaak hele verre verplaatsingen, terwijl dat je dan eigenlijk op zaterdag nog ook graag een ander klassement zou willen rijden. Dus dan rij je op zaterdag in België en de volgende dag moet je eigenlijk in Frankrijk of soms Tsjechië staan.
Ja, wat is dat een probleem, dat die verschillende circuits niet echt rekening met elkaar houden? Of is het gewoon heel duidelijk, is de wereldbeker, is dat eigenlijk het probleemcircuit?
Nou ja, de wereldbeker heeft een monopolie, hè? Dus die krijgt natuurlijk alle mooie datums, alle goede datums, alle zondagen. En dat dringt natuurlijk alle andere klassementen tot een zaterdag of een andere dag. En maakt het natuurlijk moeilijker alles goed te plannen.
So that was Lars van der Haar on the Dutch radio. And yes, it was in Dutch, so I will translate it. Pretty much it came down to Van der Haar saying, the schedule of the World Cup is too big. I will need to go training at some point. And second of all, the World Cup does not consider the dates of the other classifications, X2O and Super Prestige, which leads to the fact that some transfers, and he's referring to the Kortrijk-Dublin transfer, are impossible and I'm forced to make choices. This is pretty much the same critique as Sven Nys, as Gerben de Knecht, as Bart Wellens, a number of mainly Belgian stakeholders have had on the World Cup. The World Cup, as said, expanded from roughly 8 races to 16 and now 14 races. Issam, this is the 3rd season that we have a big World Cup calendar like this. So far, the goal of the reforms of Flanders Classics to internationalize the sport. We're 3 years in. How do you think that we should conclude, or a premature conclusion on that should be? Is it successful? Is it a failure? Is it too much? What do you think about the critique of Lars van der Haar?
Well, I think that, his critique comes from some place, I guess, and it's he's the rider, and I'm not the rider. I'm not the one that has to race a double weekend, that has to race that December month that we have seen is super packed. So in that sense, it's very easy for me to talk on the calendar and all that kind of stuff. At the end of the day, it's the riders that have to go through those races and the calendar and the planning and the traveling and all that kind of stuff. So, like I said, I want to kind of discredit my position of what I'm going to say. But I think making the World Cup smaller, which is kind of the suggestion that Lars van der Haar is giving and has been giving for, I think, the couple of years, the moment basically the World Cup started to expand and to grow, I don't think that necessarily is the issue. I think that the issue lays more in the planning of the calendar and the races that we have at the moment in it. I think Lappartient, one of the parts that he, where he was talking about what was actually quite, a solid point, was the fact that he was saying that we need a support race for Val di Sole, that we need maybe another Italian race there, and we need a race in Canada, or maybe another race in the States. Specifically, he said a race in Canada. But, that is where we should be heading to. And I think having now 6 races in Belgium, 2 races in the Netherlands, in a 14-race calendar, I don't think that is it. Reducing the calendar is an option. It's definitely, you could maybe say, okay, 14 is maybe a little too much. We go to 11, we go to 12, we go to 10, maybe 9. But the issue with that is when you're going to reduce the amount of races in the World Cup, it means that races like the X2O and the Super Prestige will have some of the Sundays, I guess. And they will also have maybe a better position. And the whole goal of the World Cup at the moment is that the World Cup wants to be the most important competition, the most important classification, the classification that every rider wants to compete in and wants to win, or at least have a very good result at. And I think internationally it's working. I would say that internationally everybody wants to compete in the World Cup and sees the World Cup as the most important competition. But when you look at the biggest stakeholder, I would say, the Belgian riders and the Belgian teams, you see a kind of a different view on it. And, that has financial reasons. It has reasons with traveling as well. So I think the World Cup needs to balance those two thoughts. Maybe see if the 14 races is a bit too much. It is possible. We could maybe see something happen there, some movements. But for me personally, I would say that they have to look into, first of all, way too many Belgian races, something that Lappartient said as well. We need to have a support race in both, a race in Canada, a race in Italy. And we need to look into, what are the other things that we can improve on the World Cup. The point system, for example, is not all too great. Financially, the prize money, we have to look into that. Maybe we have to look into how we are going to be able to improve or at least attract it to multiple countries that would be willing to actually organize a World Cup other than what we have right now. I think those are paths that we should be looking at, and that we should be seek for opportunities, seek for what we can do. But to just say that the World Cup, has way too many races and it needs to get cut down, and we need to go to 9 or 8 is almost like you really want to keep the 3 classifications at the same level. And I don't think that is what we need in the sport. If the sport wants to grow, in my belief, I think that we need to have a World Cup as the biggest, the most important classification. And I don't think that is going to happen if you're going to reduce the numbers only.
That is in essence why I'm against an 8-round World Cup. This year we're going to 7 countries: United States, Belgium, Netherlands, France, Ireland, Italy and Spain. Next year the Czech Republic will normally join that list. Tabor would come back after they organize Worlds, which puts us at 8 countries. If we would race in these 8 countries at the venues we have now, you're limiting the growth of the sport. And that's ignoring the backlash we would get from either sacrificing Hulst or Hogerheide, or sacrificing one out of the Belgian races. We should thrive for not having that single US round. We should have a second round there, or a round in Canada. We should thrive for that round in the UK, hopefully London, but if it's somewhere else, great. Leeds, Yorkshire, somewhere. UK is booming. The talks are big. We should go back to countries like Switzerland. But if you're sticking to 8 countries, how are you going to do that? It's not possible. It's super difficult to get cyclocross race organizers to organize every other year. Sponsors that are putting in money, quite significant amounts of money, will want that security that they can be there for years. They don't want to be a one-off and then a year not and then back. It's a bad investment for them. Normally they just sign, okay, well, for 5 years this is our strategy, we're going to pump it into cyclocross event. They don't want to have 5 events over 10 years. It doesn't work like that. So that's why I'm in essence against going back to 8. But in the current format, when we don't have second races across the pond in North America, when we don't have a race in the UK, I agree with you, Issam. It's too much to have a World Cup with 6 Belgian races and 2 Dutch races. If I were to make the calendar for next year, I would reduce that World Cup schedule, assuming there's only Tabor coming back. I would try and slash a number of those Belgian races. And yes, those are tough decisions to make, but I do think it's needed to fix your calendar. And as funny as you said it, Lappartient actually made some good points despite the idiocy or the craziness of that article. The parts about we need to make travel more affordable, that is actually, I think, key to the solution of fixing the World Cup. At the end of last season, we spoke with Sven Nys on the podcast, and here's what he said about the format of the World Cup.
Well, for me, the calendar is never too full. We can't complain about the visibility of our sport because it's really important that we have a lot of races live on TV. But for me, the most important is that we always have the space to promote cyclocross in our own country. And if you are going to have every weekend a World Cup, what we saw now the last few years, it's really difficult to combine the World Cup with promoting the sport in your own country. If you can do 2 World Cups Saturday, Sunday close to each other, financially it's much better for the teams. And then you have also the opportunity to say, okay, then we have a free weekend where the Swiss riders can ride in Switzerland, where the French riders can ride in France, and where the Belgian riders can ride in Belgium.
So Nys, in essence, a guy who's against the World Cup, he's from Golazzo, Flanders Classics, the main rival of Golazzo, organizes the World Cup, says that he thinks it would be much better if they can try and agglomerate these races together, Tabor and potentially Munich. Okay, Munich is having very, very many financial issues, but you get the point. If you can put these things together, or maybe why not have 2 races in Waterloo? I mean, Trek is a big organizer. That's where I think you can make a difference, because then you touch upon one of the most important points, Issam: money. It's super expensive, not only for the Belgian riders, just for the international riders to travel up and down for a single race every weekend. And the World Cup says they are the most lucrative classification, but that's not true, is it?
Maybe if you're going to check the numbers just in total, you're not going to take the costs into account. You might end up with the World Cup being the most lucrative for the riders, but you have to take so much into account. Obviously, the World Cup has this prize money for both the general classification and also your finishing result each race. I think that it is 5,000 for winning a race and 30,000 for the winner of the general classification in the end. Yeah, in total, obviously, it looks like you're going to be earning a little bit more money, but like you said already, the costs of those races outside of the center of cyclocross Belgium in a way. Even the international guys, most of them have some sort of residence or at least a stay in Belgium, and then from there they have to make that travel to Val d'Isole, and they have to make that travel to Dublin, and they have to make that travel to France as well, to Troyes and Flamanville. So with all these costs, you already, that prize money already is reducing quite a lot. And then on top of that, you have these classifications like an XO trophy that has the same amount of money for the winner. Then it goes gradually a little bit faster in terms of the money for the second and third place and fourth place and so on. But they have start money. And so there they compensated it. And, it says something in a way that Sven van Empel chooses to go and do the XO trophy instead of a full World Cup. That, it is financially, it is attractive for a rider to do the XO trophy, and they would probably gain more doing that, having done less races than doing the World Cup. Obviously, you can go for a combination, and that is the issue. You can go for a combination, but then you would skip a couple of races. But, who cares? I mean, I'm still getting some of my money, and if everybody is kind of skipping some races left and right, in the end, in the classification, you will not feel it. I mean, Van der Haar was saying it himself, I will be skipping those races, but, I might still be in a chance of having a very good result in the World Cup. And if those races that I'm skipping would allow me to also have a chance in other classifications, I take it. And, who are we to blame him for that, I guess? There are a lot of contradictions in a way of what is being said. And especially with that comment of Van den Abelen, where he's trying to, put himself in a position of, we are the big spenders. We really want to give the money to the riders and stuff. I mean, it's basically not true. It's they are basically on par with the XO trophy, and that is, I think, in my opinion, that is a big issue. I think if you want to have riders being committed to your classification, I think money is a big issue. And like you said, it's not only prize money, but it's also about the traveling, making the traveling easier, making sure that it's more affordable, having a more logical order in your calendar. It's all these smaller things and bigger things that, if you work on the smaller things first, which are easy to do in my opinion, you would end up already with a more affordable World Cup, which means that the riders and the teams will have more left in the pocket. And it makes it more, lucrative for the riders, as they are stating right now, which, as we have gone through it, is basically not the entire story, of course.
Yeah, and it's the top riders who benefit from that increased prize money. On the lower level, it's not there as much, and it's easier to talk from the perspective of Belgian teams. And let me just start by saying that the idea of Flanders Classics making the World Cup the most important is succeeding to a large extent. We've had a couple of successful events added, Val d'Isole, but especially Benidorm and Dublin have been super successful. We see teams like Pauwelsausen say World Cup is most important, we first plan the World Cup, Alpecin does the same, and then they plan the rest. But that's not the case for all the teams. Tormans of Bart Wellens doesn't really do it that way. Golazzo, Sven Nys, or the Belwaze Trek Lions, they don't do that either. To kind of conclude my idea on the fixes, as you say, we should try and thrive for getting more races closely together. I think that also means stepping away from the idea that you have a race every single Sunday. I think the World Cup can take place on a number of Sundays, but they should try, Flanders Classics and the UCI, to deepen that trip to the US. There should be 2 or 3 races there, and if you're going for 3, it should be in 2 weekends, so there should be a midweek race. If you're only going to Waterloo, try and see if you can squeeze in 2 races there or something. For Val d'Isole, maybe it's great if you can add a race there, but ideally you start working with travel legs. For instance, I think it's pretty stupid that we're going from Troyes in France to Dublin in Ireland and then to Flamanville. It would make way more sense if you do Troyes, Flamanville and then Dublin. It makes the travel a bit easier. If you try and fix these things, as you say, you come towards a solution. But I think another part of this solution lies in a quote that his dad, Sven Nys, gave us in that same interview at the end of last season.
Kuhn is now an important rider in Switzerland. He can be a really good ambassador for cyclocross in Switzerland, but then he needs to have also the possibility to ride in his own country.
So basically what Sven Nys is saying, he used the example Kevin Kuhn, it's important that the best riders of their own country race in their own national series. Kuhn should have a number of weekends to race in Switzerland, Vanterini should have a number of weekends to race against Dubois in France, and I think these are valid points. The World Cup should not be every single weekend from the start to the end of the season. There should be the possibility for riders to go on a mid-season training camp, but try and plan this properly. There should be, I think, a number of weekends which are empty, which are dedicated to national series, probably 3 or 4 weekends. So that would mean the Coupe de France, which is 3 weekends, can take place then. The Swiss National Series can take place in those weekends, and the best riders can race there. What do you think, Issam? Do you think that that is an important step, and maybe just ignore the aspect of the Belgian classifications, because we will get to that in a bit. After this, we will dive into the deeper underlying issue.
Why I definitely think that every rider should have, their choice of racing what they want, and we went briefly over it. Some teams have also the pressure from the sponsors that they have to show up for these races because the sponsors wants them to show up, and then it also becomes a sort of an have to instead of only just being there for importance of cyclocross, where the smaller races in a certain region like Kuhn in Switzerland, that then the importance of cyclocross becomes bigger, and that you have a name that is actually participating in those series, which elevates also the younger guys that are there, and so on and so on. I think if you look at from that perspective, I definitely think that he has a very good point, but I don't think that at the moment it's not possible, in my opinion. Obviously you have these trips, but you always are going to have those trips. Even if you are going to have a smaller World Cup, you will still have races being overlapped. You will still have these issues of a regional race on the Saturday and the World Cup on the Sunday, because frankly it's something that has been happening for quite some years already. It's not a new phenomenon or something. And that's also kind of, I would say, the surprise why the discussion all of a sudden boiled over like some sort of, the outrage and sometimes even a played outrage, and this can no longer be happening, and the quote of "we are not a toy, the World Cup is not a toy, you cannot play with us." I mean, these are, in a way, it's a bit surprising, and I think, for us it's quite kind of understanding, because the Belgium, Netherlands, we kind of know that it has been playing for a couple of years already, the back and forth between Golazzo, between Flanders Classics, Sven Nys, Lars van der Haar. We have heard them already say these kind of things a couple of times already. The back and forward has been going on for a couple of years already, but now it's to a whole new level, and it gets a lot of attention at the moment, and even internationally it's getting picked up quite a lot. And I think that someone that is not within that circle of Belgium and the Netherlands in terms of news and media that they get, they are kind of surprised and see it as I don't even know how they are looking at the situation right now.
Well, that touches upon the point you made earlier, the view internationally on the World Cup to the view in the Benelux, and mainly just the B and NE part of that, Netherlands and Belgium. It's just so far apart. At the same time, you have Chad Brown, who's one of the main guys behind the Waterloo World Cup, saying stuff like, the cyclocross thing's too small, we should be going to Tokyo or to Melbourne, Australia and Japan, that would be great. And at the same time, you have the Dutch and Belgian riders and teams complaining a lot. A lot of our feedback comes from international followers who don't really understand the perspective of the issues about the World Cup. Most criticism comes from the World Cup not being a proper World Cup. They are mad about there being 6 races in Belgium. But the discussion in Belgium is completely different. There, the World Cup is bad. generally the CEO of Flanders Classics, Thomas van der Spiegel, who is a former basketball guy, is seen as a very bad guy. He's not well liked. Yes, he organizes the Tour of Flanders, but in cross they don't care. The fans think he is an outsider guy who knows nothing about cross, thinks way too American, even though he never played in the NBA, but is just out there to ruin the sport and fill his own wallet. And the perspective there is just completely different. And part of it you can hear in this quote from Bart Wellens today in the Sporza Daily podcast.
Ik denk dat er een combinatie van de drie alleen maar mogelijk is, dat er minder wedstrijden, of in alle drie de klassementen evenveel wedstrijden zijn, dat een renner dat mooi kan verdelen. En dat is op deze moment niet, maar...
So Bart Wellens here is kind of showing the underlying issue for the World Cup to grow from a Belgian perspective. I don't want to diss cyclocross in Belgium. Belgium is the motherland of cross. It's the heartland of cross. It is by far the region in the world where cross is most popular. We need Belgium, we need Flanders for cross to make money. It's not therefore bad that Belgium has a big role, but his idea of the World Cup needs to shrink to 8 so it can have the same relevance as the Super Prestige and X2O trophy, that is, I think, where part of the issue comes from. I've said before that Van den Abele and Lappartient were defending their own child. I think the same is going on with the situation of the riders who are criticizing the World Cup. Most critique on the World Cup has come from 3 people: Erwin Vervecken, Sven Nys, and Lars van der Haar. If you look at the riders who are skipping the World Cups, it's the Baloise Trek Lions riders. Baloise Trek Lions is owned by Golazzo. Golazzo bid to organize the World Cup, but it went to Flanders Classics. That process was messy. If you look at the riders who are having critique, it's mainly those riders, those people from Golazzo. The riders, people from Golazzo, have critique on it. Golazzo has played some, well, they don't say they played games, but if you look at it, boycott of Val di Sol of all Baloise Trek Lions riders in the first season, the last minute cancellations of Antwerp, the last minute cancellation or basically dropping of Zonhoven, which was then last minute saved by Flanders Classics. Both Antwerp and Zonhoven switched from Golazzo to Flanders Classics since the World Cup got reformed. Everything together, at Flanders Classics they feel that Golazzo is playing games with them and doing everything they can to boycott the World Cup, to put them in a bad daylight. At the same time, Golazzo organizes the X2O trophy, and the X2O trophy is the series which has the most pain from the new World Cup. In recent seasons, it's not been as important. It does not help for the relationships when the CEO of Flanders Classics gave an interview in Het Laatste Nieuws last year, where he says, in the future of cross, there is no space for 2 classifications in Belgium. Just like all countries, we need to go to 1 national series. But we're not going to stop organizing the Super Prestige, which basically means, he says, there's no future for the X2O trophy. If you put all those things together, Issam, you can kind of conclude that Golazzo is also protecting their X2O trophy, but the relationships between Golazzo on one side and Flanders Classics on the other side are completely broken.
That's a very fair assessment. I think that, look, I mean, Golazzo is in a sporting organization that is not only involved in cyclocross, they do some on the road as well, I think, and I know them from the running side. I think for a couple of years already they are organizing marathons and all these kind of stuff. So, they know what they are doing. They also realized quite quickly with the reforming of the World Cup that if there was going to be one classification that was going to be, hurting the most of all the classifications, it was going to be the XO trophy, because it was kind of this classification that you could use next to the World Cup. And now with the World Cup expanding, also having these weekends where they had a race not in Belgium and not in the Netherlands, but in either Ireland or in Italy, compromised the XO trophy quite a lot, I think. And it's, and also the the exact cross in a way, but that's to a lesser extent, and I think that everybody kind of forgets almost that the exact cross exists. Maybe we will realize it when Van der Poel and Van Aert will show up in Loenhout. But it's I think that it is very evident that Golazzo, from the moment that Flanders Classics and the UCI with the World Cup had this new reforming way and thinking of the World Cup and what they wanted to achieve with it, the expansion, it hurt Golazzo and it hurt the XO trophy, and they didn't really feel very happy with that. It doesn't help that Flanders Classics made no secret of it, that their ideal world would probably be a world where you had maybe 2 classifications, but definitely not an XO trophy, which means that you would end up with a World Cup and you would end up with a Super Prestige, and we would leave behind our the Golazzo classification with the XO trophy. And I think the dynamic has not been great, and I think the dynamic at the moment is probably at an all-time low, but in the end I think that those 2 sporting bodies need to discuss, because I think it's for the greater good. I think that in the end we will not gain anything if Flanders Classics and Golazzo will keep on doing this. And Golazzo, I don't want to put actions into what they are doing and stuff, but I feel that they could be using, or they already are using, their riders to make a point. And I don't think that is fair. I don't think it's good, and I don't think it will help the sport in any way, shape, or form. And it's a tricky situation, and I think that some people are underestimating the severity it could have on cyclocross and the growth of it. It's for the greater good that those 2 organizations can have a talk and try to help each other out and see where they end up in conversation.
I think the need for talks and diplomacy are now more present than ever. As you say, they cannot afford to not find a solution here. It can have severe consequences. At the same time, when I hear Peter van den Nabele say we as World Cup need to critically reflect our own thing and potentially move to December, I'm not a fan of that. But at the same time, at least Lappartient didn't, but Peter van den Nabele doesn't completely blame the riders. When I hear Golazzo talk for the past 3 seasons, and maybe even a bit longer, it feels like they are just drowning in their own sad feelings. Do they critically reflect the product of the X2O trophy? I will play a quote now from Erwin Vervecken ahead of the Koppenberg Cross on the Belgian radio.
Radio 1.
De Ochtend met Leen de Witte.
Goedemorgen, ik hoop dat de dag voor u ook wat later begint dan gewoonlijk. Maar we zijn er met de ochtend. Heel erg welkom.
Ja, het is een wedstrijd op woensdag en zeker voor de dameselites. Die rijden hun Europees kampioenschap al zaterdag in Frankrijk. Er zijn er een paar die dan opteren om niet te koersen, alles op het Europees kampioenschap te zetten. Wij vinden het uiteraard jammer, we hadden ze graag allemaal aan de start gehad. Maar dat is de keuze van de renner en die moeten we respecteren. Maar zeker bij de dameselites is het startveld inderdaad wat minder. Bij de mannen staat zowat iedereen aan de start die wij heel graag aan de start hadden. Dus daar is het iets minder, omdat die nog een dagje extra recuperatie hebben. Ja.
So that was Erwin Vervecken on the Belgian radio ahead of the Koppenberg Cross, saying that he couldn't really understand and was a bit sad that the riders, especially on the women's side, were skipping the Koppenberg Cross. But for the past few years, I've only heard them complain that the World Cup is taking over their position. And whilst I just said that process of the World Cup ending up at Flanders Classics was dubious, and whilst I do think there's unfair competition because Flanders Classics gets to decide the World Cup dates and then can plan the Super Prestige around it, the X2O trophies should critically reflect their own format because it doesn't work. If you have a time-based classification and you put in a chunk of difficult races, starting with the Koppenberg, just a couple of days before the European Championships, what is the incentive? What incentive are you creating for riders to race your series? Because the Koppenberg, If you look at Sanne Kant, who ended in the top 10, from the top of my head, she was 8th on the Koppenberg. It would have been better for her to stay at home. She lost more time than that they would have had if she stayed at home. So she does end on the same amount of time, 5 minutes 15 in the GC, but still, she could have saved energy. What's the incentive for riders to do that? If you put in very tough races like Herentals, like Brussels, what else do we have? Well, Kortrijk is not that difficult, but Lille is also not an easy cross. Kokzijde isn't easy either. Baal, another heavy course. How are you going to, one, create an attractive format where the classification on time is exciting to the end, which creates extra attention in the press? And second of all, how are you going to attract riders if your classification for 50% is made up of super atypical races? The thing is, you can only have your start money in your pocket to try and do that. But at the end of the day, for riders who need to make choices, it's way easier to choose for the Super Prestige rather than an X2O trophy where they know, well, after the Koppenberg, I'm going to be out of contention. And if it's not the Koppenberg, then it's going to be Herentals, or it's going to be Baal, or it's going to be Brussels, or because I can't ride sand, I'm going to lose a ton of time in Kokzijde. I think that part of the critical reflection is missing for the format of the X2O trophy.
Yeah, indeed, and it's also, Golazzo is not really an organization that blames themselves. What have they done in the last couple of years to improve their formats? We are now talking about that they should improve certain things on their formats, but what have they done? I don't think they have done a lot. Flanders Classics is not perfect, by the way. We're not advocating or choosing a side or anything. Flanders Classics have done their wrongs also. I think that has to be said, but it is just, Golazzo is like, they're standing on the sides, and when you make a mistake, instead of trying to be somewhat helping you out, they start criticizing you, and then when you ask them to do it, to help out or to show how it should be done, they're like, no, we don't need to show that. We already have something going on for ourselves and stuff. And their format doesn't make a lot of sense in my opinion. I think that the Koppenberg is definitely a race that should stay on the calendar, but I don't think that it's really fitting. And like you said, it's overall their whole calendar, the races that they have, it's hard race after hard race in a way, and it's definitely not the same kind of racing, the same type of racing. And with a time classification, it's not great. And you don't show up, you get 5 minutes, and for some riders that is also enough to skip 1 or 2 races and then still win, because you had the Koppenberg, you had a big gap, you had maybe a good race in Kokzijde, like you said, Herentals, if it's going to be raining there, well, good luck, you're going to be losing some time there as well. Golazzo has been, can definitely look themselves in the mirror and look at the mistakes that they have been making. And I think that for them, probably the most important thing is, in their interest, by the way, I think that it's also in their interest to have a good talk with Flanders Classics, because I don't think, at the end of the day, Flanders Classics has the UCI behind them. They are going to be able to pick the dates, and if they think that December is going to be it, which I fully agree, by the way, with you, is definitely not the solution, but if they are just going to be picking all the good dates from, let's say, mid-November to January to the World Championships, what is the X2O Trophy then going to do? Are they then just going to be organizing from September to mid-November, and then maybe after the World Championships, who's going to watch that? Who is going to be interested in that? They should really, look themselves in the mirror, look at what they can improve, and have a talk with Flanders Classics, because I don't think the solution is just standing on the sidelines and hating on someone's plan, hating on another classification, and not even looking or trying to improve your own sake, because they are not they're not doing great either at this point.
In the defense of Golazzo, one of the main people there, Christoph Impens, has said, we only want a dialogue at this stage. it's kind of after the complete escalation. It's like UCI escalation model, and now Golazzo is like, oh, we just want to talk. And I think as said earlier, that is important, but to just list the number of points that the Flanders Classics have improved on the World Cup, they have helped build that race in Val di Sole, they've helped build that race in Benidorm, they have helped build that race in Dublin, they have improved the broadcasts. I mean, I do think it's dubious that there's no course maps, but at least the interviews are slowly turning English. At least we are getting a couple of interviews before the start with slow-mo cameras around, the drone cam. They are moving forward, whereas for the X2O trophy, I can't really see that. Does that mean I think the X2O trophy should be shot like Van der Spiegel kind of indicated should happen in his interview? No, I don't think so. I think there's a possibility for the Super Prestige and X2O trophy to exist in a situation where there's a bigger World Cup. But at the same time, if you look how many races there are in Belgium, ultimately the growth of the sport will need to come from that big base of Belgian races. And I don't think that has to be the X2O trophy or the Super Prestige, but the Christmas period as we have now is not sustainable. That is also what forces riders to make decisions about which races they do, because they can't race 5 days in a row. So you need to factor for that and then maybe consider, well, the X2O trophy didn't always start with the Koppenberg. There was a time when they started with Ronse. There have been times that they started elsewhere. Why don't they try and find out a way to maybe start the Super Prestige, or for sure the X2O trophy, a bit earlier in the season, and then have it more spread out? Talk with Flanders Classics, try and get a number of dedicated weekends for the national trophies, and then above all, I do think that Flanders Classics and the UCI need to generate more revenue. I side with them that to find international sponsors we first need to go abroad, 100% agree, but it is just necessary that there's more money. They need to either increase prize funds or pay some sort of travel allowance to teams, because otherwise it's not sustainable. I think this is kind of my final conclusion. So put the races together better so it's more affordable, keep a couple of weekends for a national series, don't fully focus on 14 races and then fill it up with Belgian and Dutch races, and try and increase money. Those would be my final conclusions, and I will give the final word to you, Issam.
I think I agree with the points. At the end of the day, I think that cyclocross would be benefiting from having one main competition and having the others, the Super Prestige and the X2O trophy, kind of being the lower classifications that you would do if you want to, help yourself out with some money. But it's, in the end, it should be the World Cup, and to achieve that, I think that your points were spot on. I think that is definitely what Flanders Classics and the UCI should be looking at to improve the World Cup. I think, on the other hand, discussions needs to be held with the teams, with the riders as well, with Golazzo. I think that will be necessary to eventually get cyclocross into, in my opinion, the quote-unquote right direction. I think because right now, I just read an article on the program of Wout van Aert that has been revealed, and then I read Flanders Classics is not happy with the program or at the moment the temporary program that we have seen from Wout van Aert. I mean, why is Flanders Classics, by the way, so mad on the program of Wout van Aert? I mean, it's, of course, I understand the big three, they are very important for the sport, but they should not be the reason why we are going to be changing races and changing regulations, or what. I don't even know what we're going to be changing. The sport has more to it than only the big three, and we should just be looking at opportunities and be, I think that Flanders Classics maybe has to look into what you're saying, bigger funds, and invest in the sport, because I believe that if you're going to be investing in the sport, the sport can grow and grow more and more, and eventually get to a certain level that we might grow out of only this sort of Belgium economy that we are living in at the moment. I think that there is room for that expansion, but it will take time, it will take investments, it will take discussion, and I think in the end we will get there. But it will take time, and it will take some articles, and it will take some weird interviews being taken by Lappartient, and then the next guy that's coming up maybe as UCI president, and in the end, we will get there. But hopefully, I expect big changes going into the next World Cup season. That is going to be important next step, and I hope to hear in the next coming weeks and months that Flanders Classics and Golazzo will be having some sort of discussions to clear the air between the two, make sure that they have no misconceptions going into the next season, and help each other out. I think having both is a very good thing, but I think that the ambition of having a very big World Cup in cyclocross is also very important. And we'll see where it ends up. We will be keeping following, I guess, and hopefully we don't hear some other quotes or something, because then we have to sit again on this.
Well, I would still like to pick in on a couple of points you said, because earlier this podcast you said it looked like Flanders Classics was in a state of panic. And that might have to do with the fact that they learned that Wout van Aert is only racing one World Cup. And why are they mad about that? Because they know that Wout van Aert is the most influential rider in cyclocross. Yes, Mathieu van der Poel is world champion. Yes, he's a tremendous athlete. But in Belgium, more people like Wout van Aert than Mathieu van der Poel. They know that if Van Aert comes, there's a couple of thousand extra spectators coming. They know it returns. And that is why they are unhappy about him not racing. Should the entire sport change around that? No. I do think that it's interesting, a suggestion which was made by Ruben van Gucht, Belgian sports commentator, in the Sporza Daily podcast. He said that the UCI is working behind the scenes on reforming the entire calendar. So that's not only cyclocross. He's talking about a proper rehaul, incentivizing teams to also have cyclocross riders, that there should be a ranking where you earn points in every discipline, potentially doing something with licenses or whatever. And that would include cyclocross, that would include probably mountain biking, it would include gravel, it would include road. Those are the type of fixes that can permanently improve the situation of cyclocross. It would be much needed, because you see many cross riders are drawn to the road because there's more money, more prestige, and at the end of the day also more support. And I think that is a way better way to look at it than from the perspective of Het Nieuwsblad, one of the biggest newspapers in Belgium, where their chief editor for cycling writes a column saying the World Cup gets what it's deserved. It's stupid that we're going to Ireland. It's stupid that we're going to Val di Sole. If riders complain, they're called idiots, but it's the UCI who only wants to earn money. And that will be my final point. We really also need to wonder, how is it possible that it's so much more expensive to organize a World Cup than a Super Prestige? The races are both organized by Flanders Classics. Overijse dropped from World Cup to Super Prestige. It was cheaper for them to organize, but the infrastructure, everything just looked completely the same. But it saved them between 120 and 80,000 euros on their budget. These are key fixes. And as you said, Issam, I'm also hoping that things will change. I'm not sure if it will be for next season, because at the end of the day, it is mid-November. There's roughly 2 months left to fix this, although if they really want to make changes, they can always just delay releasing the World Cup schedule for next year, because they've done that before. Then thank you for this lengthy discussion.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and I hope the listeners can, make something out of it, and hopefully it was kind of helpful for the ones that, did not really follow what was going on, and I hope it is, making it a little bit more clear now.
Then that will cover it for this episode. We recorded this on Monday, so by the time this comes out on Thursday, stuff we have said might already be outdated, but that is what it is. We hope that it still gave you a picture on what's going on, the key actors in this, the main protagonists and everything. Thanks for listening. Make sure to give it a rating. If you have any comments, you can write to us at noah@cyclocross with 3 S's at the end.com. Send us an Instagram DM, comment on one of our posts, or reach out to us on Twitter. Thanks for listening and goodbye.